All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here talking about passing your Bitcoins from the grave. My name's Peter Dunworth. I'm an investment advisor. I look after a number of high net worth families, and one of the things that we deliver for all of our families that we look after is the ability for them to have a secure process for that family to ensure that their next generation looks after their self-custodied Bitcoin. So I thought today I'd make it a little bit broader than that and start from the very beginning of a Bitcoin journey and think about what are some of the things we should be thinking about before we get into Bitcoin, through Bitcoin, and then sadly when we're no longer able to think about it. So let's have a look. So starting from scratch, when we start this journey, we want to think of the end in mind. So what are we going to do with this Bitcoin purchase? We need to think about what are our options. And by what are our options, what I'm referring to is what are the legal entities that we've got available or access to us that is going to give us the best opportunity from a tax perspective, tax advantaged purchases, or alternatively, the best asset protection. So those are the two major considerations that you want to think when starting out on this journey from a generational wealth perspective. And before I go into some of the options that we've got there, I might just preface this by saying that when we think about this journey, we've got current price of Bitcoin is sitting at circa 30,000 US a coin. My expectations in the next 10 years is that this thing's going to be $10 million a coin. And so we want to be planning for that now rather than thinking about that in the future when it is that, because we don't know when we're going to die and we want to be basically prepared for everything. So plan for the worst, hope for the best. So in thinking about it, what are our options in Australia anyway for this investment? We've really got only 4 entities that we can do. We've got the ability to put it into our personal names, which is probably what most of us do with dollar cost averaging. We've got the ability to put it into our superannuation with a self-managed superannuation fund. We've got the ability to purchase it in a company name if you set up a company, and then we've got the ability to put it into a trust structure, and there are multiple trust structures in Australia. There's living trusts, family trust, discretionary trusts, and if I go through and think about where the end is with these structures that we want to be purchasing that in, I'd say from a personal point of view, to maximise the tax effect or minimise the tax effect of your wealth long term, the best entity to buy that in is obviously self-managed superannuation fund. That has its pros and cons in that you can't access that money till typically 60, 65 years of age. However, it does give you some very strong legal protections which no other entity entity allows you to do that, legal entity I should say. Companies are my least favoured option because in Australia you have the requirement that when you borrow money from your company, you are required to pay that back within a 7-year period. And in thinking about this long term, that doesn't set us up for intergenerational wealth and the ability to use that Bitcoin in the most effective and flexible way that we can. So the company I would put as the last option that I'd like to purchase that in. Personal, we understand buying it in a personal name. However, that opens ourselves up to a whole lot of potential legal risks from a whole host of things. There could be, you could have an accident, you could have professional malfeasance, you could have all sorts of things that if you're holding that Bitcoin in a personal name, then you're potentially subject to some form of legal suit or claim against that. So from a personal point of view, I try and avoid holding that in a personal name. My preferred and favoured option for this is, of the trust structures, would be to hold that in discretionary, not a family trust. There's a small distinction between the discretionary and the family trust. Fundamentally, they're, for all intents and purposes, the same, but a discretionary trust gives you the flexibility to have what's called a corporate trustee, and that's basically a corporate entity that can be a corporate beneficiary as well, whereas the family trusts don't allow that. And this comes in quite handy from a tax planning perspective at a later stage. So why does all this matter? Well, we're probably all here because we understand that something's wrong, and we've probably looked around at how our governments are spending money, and we're a little bit despondent or displeased with how they're spending our money. And quite personally, I don't want to give them any more money than they need or that I have to give them. So if we structure things in the best possible way, we can minimise that from a long-term perspective. Actually, I might just check I've got that. What happens to your existing Bitcoin if you want to change structures? There's a number of ways that you can do that. However, there could be capital gains tax consequences for doing it. I'd suggest talking to your accountant or potential lawyer for discussing that. So legal ownership versus control. This is where I think the legal framework, our systems and processes from a society that we've built up have got a huge problem on their hands in dealing with Bitcoin, because for the first time in history, they have a bearer asset that they have no control over, outside of gold and some other things. But typically, if you're transferring wealth, in Australia, most of the wealth is tied up in either properties or shares. If you're transferring shares or properties, it's very easy to transfer that because there's rules, regulations, processes, systems, basically dedicated to the safe transfer of that. So you're within the legal framework. And this is where the difference between Bitcoin v property shares and every other asset out there is the fact that Bitcoin can be held personally and you don't have to go through any structure, any government entity to pass that on. And therein lies both the benefit and the potential disadvantage, because there is a very real possibility that you have the ability to lose your Bitcoin and your beneficiaries, your estate, your executor will have no control or claim over that. And this is really the only asset that we have in Australia or the world over that has or presents this problem. And this is where our governments are going to have to get their heads around how do we actually deal with this from a probate perspective in transferring these assets to their beneficiaries, because Bitcoin basically doesn't care about any rules and regulations that the governments try to impose on it, and that's probably half the reason why we're all here. So legal ownership can be defined as who actually owns it, but with Bitcoin, Bitcoin doesn't care about legal ownership. All it cares about is who controls that Bitcoin. And this is going to represent, I think, a big paradigm shift in our legal framework. And there probably needs to be a lot of work done on this for the future, because this effectively redefines our legal system, and it basically puts above our legal framework, it basically puts cryptography in front of it, i.e. who has control of that Bitcoin rather than legal claim. And this is a big topic. I could talk all day about that, but there's probably more important stuff and more valuable things that we could talk about. So I might just get a quick show of hands. Who in the room has a will? Pretty good. I'd say maybe 30% of the room has a will. That is pretty good, believe it or not. There's a lot of rooms I go to and there's a lot less. And why is a will important? Well, a will is basically a last will and testament, as it sounds, as to what you want to leave your beneficiaries and how that is to be conducted. And so there are a number of different options when it comes to a will that most people look at a will and think, and this is really boring, morbid talk. Normally I'm an upbeat guy, but sadly we've got to talk about death for a minute because this is part of it. What are your options with wills? You've fundamentally got two. You've got a simple will, and then you have a more complicated will, which is fundamentally involves a testamentary trust. Now, pricing of these wills typically ranges from a simple will with $500, there or thereabouts, maybe under $1,000, and then you've got the more complicated wills, which take into account a whole host of things that include a testamentary trust, and they can be anywhere from $2,500 to $50,000 for an estate plan that encompasses that, and some other, I guess, legal frameworks, such as an enduring power of attorney and power of attorney. Why are they important, or why would you want to pay $2,500 when you can pay $500 for a will? Well, you might not care because you're dead, so it's not really your problem, but you might care about the people you're leaving that Bitcoin to. And if you put it into the right framework, a testamentary trust, the testamentary trust is really critical because it basically gives you a much better asset protection than just leaving that in a personal name, and it gives you the strongest legal claim against a family law matter, so a divorce or something of that ilk. What's important about having a testamentary trust as well is that you can have multiple beneficiaries to that trust, so you can effectively use it as a way to tax arbitrage or reduce your tax payable, and it gives you options. And for a little bit of an investment up front now, you can have a much better result long term. So what happens to your Bitcoin if you die? And this is, I think, a very morbid question, but it's really important to think about this and probably go through that process yourself. I might just have a show of hands. Has anyone gone through a recovery process without themselves involved in their own Bitcoin for the recovery of their own Bitcoin? So if they were dead. So we've got 4 people in the room, 5 people in the room out of 50, less than 10%, I'd say, have actually gone through that process. And this is where, I know it's fun to joke around, my exit strategy is death when it comes to Bitcoin, and I feel like that too. However, I'm pretty sure my beneficiaries, my children, my wife, and extended family would love to benefit from basically having to put up with all the chat I give them. So what we there have is basically a Bitcoin estate plan protocol, and this is something that we want to basically create for all clients, and I would strongly suggest you sit down and think about your own Bitcoin estate plan protocol. What I'm going to do is try and share the things that we include in that estate plan protocol, and then I would urge you to go home and think about your own Bitcoin estate plan protocol and who you would leave that to, who you can trust with it, how you would recover it, and I'll tell you a few things that we go through to think about that. So what do you want to include in your Bitcoin estate plan protocol? Well, I think firstly, you want to think about who is the person you want to give control to see a safe transition to your beneficiaries and estate. So sadly, you are going to need to trust someone. Now, whether that's your wife, whether that's your partner, whether that's your children, I think it's really critical that they have some form of treasure map to actually get that Bitcoin. On top of having the treasure map, you need to understand what type of setup that you've got or that you're leaving them, and they need to have expertise in this as well. And I had a guy reach out to me on Twitter, and he said, can you have a review of how we've set up this my estate transfer? And I said, sure. He was using a Shamir secret sharing, and he asked me, what do you think of that? And I said, look, Shamir secret sharing is a fabulous way to do it, but the problem with that I've found is that when you transfer, or when you're dead and you leave him a Shamir secret sharing, you've got to understand a few things about his level of knowledge and understanding when it comes to Bitcoin. So is he going to understand what these 24 words mean? Can we trust the beneficiaries or the executor not to, or to care for those 24 words? Are they going to put that online and basically tweet out, hey, does anyone know what these 24 words mean? These are all the considerations that we as Bitcoiners think about, but sadly our families and our children and our partners, I don't think have this consideration because they're not down the rabbit hole like us, and this is where we need to be really prudent, great custodians of these Bitcoins so that we can see our beneficiaries benefit from that long term. So who do you trust? This is a personal thing, and I don't like to make claim or tell anyone what they should be doing with their Bitcoin. And this is the beauty of Bitcoin, is that we all do what we want to do with our Bitcoin. But what I would like to share with you is a process and a protocol that we do with our clients that has ensured a 100% success rate with transferring Bitcoins from the grave. So how do we do that? Well, get a written Bitcoin estate plan protocol in place. Now, you don't have to write down all the secrets, but you need to have the crumbs in place that people can recreate what you've got. So you need to know what is the setup that you've got. Are you running a self-custody? Are your coins sitting on exchange? Are you running a multi-sig? Do you have third parties involved? Who are all the participants in this security of your Bitcoin? Personally, I like the multi-sig setup. That's a setup for, I might just get a show of hands. Does anyone understand what a multi-sig setup is or doesn't understand what a multi-sig setup is? Okay, we're all good. So I like the multi-sig setup. And the reason why I like the multi-sig setup is because we can do a collaborative custody. With a multi-sig, we can effectively deliver self-sovereignty to all our clients so they've got full control of their Bitcoin. And the promise to clients is that If they set up their multi-sig collaborative custody with us, they can walk out and completely fuck up everything that we do, and we can still recover their Bitcoin. And that to me gives me a huge peace of mind that other than sending the Bitcoin to the wrong address, so I'll just make that little disclaimer. Once it's sent, I can't get that back. That's something I can't recover. So we like the multi-sig, we like the collaborative, and it also comes with multiple built-in redundancies. So not only do we tell clients to have multiple built-in redundancies for their keys, so they might have multiple copies of their seed words, they might have seed plates, they may have a geographically distributed seed phrase literally across the globe. From a personal point of view, we hold a default key for our clients, and we use one of the software providers, whether that's Casa or Unchained, to basically be a default key holder for all of our clients. And this way, we trust Unchained to be a third-party holder, we trust ourselves to be a third-party holder, and that way our clients can basically move their coins without any of our help. And if they completely muck up everything we do, we can recover their Bitcoin. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but we have recovered millions of dollars of Bitcoin for our clients because they mucked it up. And it was a very sweet story. I'll tell you a hypothetical story about a client who was very anally retentive, very OCD, very structured, and very critical of why we were doing all this work in setting up a multi-sig. And they gave me a very tough time. And this was the last client I thought would actually require this help, because they were so diligent and they followed every part of the process. And then I had such a sweet moment when she called up and said, "Oh, Peter, I've lost my words and I've lost my device. Have I lost my Bitcoin?" And I was just thinking, oh, there is a God. So fortunately for her, fortunately for another client as well, I said, "No, you haven't. This is why we've done all this. This is literally it working in place. So come on in, we'll redo a new wallet for you. We'll do your seed words, and then we'll basically set up a new vault and send it there." So I'm thrilled to say that we haven't lost a single Bitcoin doing this, and we've basically been part of multiple estate processes that have basically seen loved ones who have passed and then been able to successfully put those Bitcoins to their loved ones. So,
are you holding 2 of their 3 seeds then?
Definitely not. Absolutely not. No.
So that's what I took out of it.
No.
How are you recovering without at least 2 of the seeds?
We use Unchained.
So Unchained has one, you have one, and they have one.
Correct. Yeah. So I will tell all my clients, you definitely do not want to share this with me. So we make sure we go through that protocol too. So I might throw it to the floor. If there are any questions, quickly, please reach out. But I've been given the 1 minute time frame, so it looks like came in perfectly. Any questions on that?
Do you think any of these structures are better or worse for a hypothetical executive order 6102 style capital?
I'm not too fussed about that. I know KYC coins are a huge buzzword at the moment, but personally I don't think it's a big deal for 3 reasons. Firstly, if you get caught with your Bitcoin, with Bitcoin, if the state wants it, there are 2 ways that you can avoid it. Firstly, you can just do what my brother talked about recently, and you can throw it into a time lock, and they can basically come back in 10 years when you're ready to give it to them, and there's nothing they can do about it. Secondly, you can have a boating accident. Not that I would suggest that, because I'm basically licensed by the state, so I don't deal in the non-KYC. And then thirdly is when you do pass that to your beneficiaries, if you're passing non-KYC coins, or alternatively, they're getting coins that are unregistered, at some point in time, your beneficiaries are going to spend that, and then the state's going to look at that and ask them, how did you get it? And if they can't prove how they get it, they're going to take it. So, one question up the back. Do you still have a question? I think it is. I think it's a wildly undervalued benefit to Bitcoin right now. It solves a lot of problems, but it's not a perfect solution right now. So Taproot is a promise to effectively have time locking with multi-sig. Personally, I'd feel really uncomfortable sending a large amount of my Bitcoin into the future in a single SIG wallet. That's my concern at the moment. So I've been told time's up. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone's interest. Thank you.